The drone's sensor beam swept across the salvage yard in methodical arcs, red light painting rust and debris in crimson streaks. Jack Morrison pressed his shoulder against the corrugated metal wall, feeling the vibration of hydraulic servos passing 3 meters overhead. Blood soaked through his shirt, where shrapnel had torn a diagonal line from collarbone to shoulder blade. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to leave a trail. His breathing came controlled, measured combat rhythm, learned 37 years ago in desert sand that felt like another lifetime. The drone paused rotors adjusting pitch as its algorithm processed thermal signatures against the ambient heat of Carrick Station 7's perpetual afternoon. Jack counted seconds. 7, 8. The machine's logic tree would branch toward probability matrices, calculating pursuit vectors based on blood dispersal patterns and human cardiovascular stress responses. At 12 seconds, he moved. 3 steps brought him to the gap between 2 gutted terraforming processors, their housing stripped for valuable metals by scavengers who'd long since moved to richer pickings. The drone's beam slashed left tracking where momentum should have carried a panicked target. Jack went right, dropping into a maintenance trench that hadn't seen authorized personnel in a decade. The second drone found him anyway. They always did. Colonial Bureau drones hunted in coordinated swarms, sharing tactical data through encrypted mesh networks. This one descended from above, cutting off his exit vector with the cold precision of military hardware. Its weapons array pivoted toward his chest, not lethal rounds, not yet, but neural disruptors that would leave him convulsing and helpless. Jack's hand found the EMP charge he had fabricated from salvaged capacitor banks. Crude engineering, but functional. His thumb pressed the activation stud as the drone's targeting laser painted a red dot over his heart. The electromagnetic pulse spread in a sphere of invisible disruption. The drone's rotors seized mid-rotation, electronics fried, and 200 kilograms of dead weight dropped like a stone. Jack rolled sideways as it crashed into the trench where he had been standing, composite armor cracking against ancient concrete. 2 down, 1 remaining, and this one had learned. It hung back beyond EMP range sensor array, cycling through spectrum bands to maintain lock without closing distance. Smart programming. Military-grade hunter-killer logic that adapted to countermeasures in real time. Jack ran. Not towards safety, there was none, but toward the abandoned HAB unit cluster on Sector 7's eastern perimeter. His boots hammered against packed regolith lungs burning in the thin atmosphere that Carrick Station's barely functional processors struggled to maintain. 68 years old, and every one of them screamed protest in his joints and muscles. But training overrode biology. You ran until you couldn't, then you ran further. The drone matched his pace, maintaining optimal engagement distance. Its tactical algorithm projected his trajectory, calculated intercept points, transmitted coordinates to response teams already mobilizing across the station. Jack's path would terminate at the HAB unit cluster in 47 seconds. Dead end. Literal kill box. He reached the closest structure, corrugated plasteel walls, weathered gray by decades of abrasive wind. The door hung crooked on damaged hinges. Jack shouldered through, spinning, to barricade the entrance with a fallen support beam. Not enough. The drone could breach walls if required. Then the wall exploded inward. Not the drone. Something else. Something massive. A violet fist punched through plasteel like tissue paper, crushing the drone in a single motion. Composite armor crumpled, circuit boards shattered, and the machine's dying electronic shriek cut off mid-transmission. The hand withdrew, leaving a hole that framed red desert sky. Jack's training kicked in. Assess, categorize, respond. The threat matrix had just shifted from hostile machines to unknown biological entity. His hand found the plasma cutter on his belt thumb, hovering over the ignition. She stepped through the hole she'd created. 8 feet of violet skin muscle moving with the controlled grace of someone who understood exactly how much force each motion required. Scars crisscrossed her exposed arms and shoulders, not the random marks of accident or misfortune, but the systematic patterns of restraint, burns, and medical experimentation. Her eyes met his amber irises that caught light like polished stone. She didn't speak. Her gaze tracked from his face to his bleeding shoulder, then to the plasma cutter in his hand. No fear registered in her expression, no aggression. Simple assessment, the way one predator evaluates another before deciding whether to engage or withdraw. Jack's tactical analysis completed in microseconds. No hostile intent in her posture. The drone's destruction had been defensive intervention, not opportunistic attack. His thumb moved away from the cutter's ignition. Her voice came low, roughened by disuse or damage. Words shaped carefully as if language itself required conscious effort. "You're bleeding. Come." She turned without waiting for response, stepping back through the wall breach. Jack hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, enough time to recognize that staying meant capture. When the next response team arrived, then followed. The salvage yards stretched across Sector 7 like mechanical graveyards, kilometers of stripped equipment and failed infrastructure. She moved through them with the confidence of someone who knew every path, every hiding place. Jack matched her paced combat training, overriding the fatigue that wanted to drag him down. His shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, blood loss starting to affect his peripheral vision. She led him deeper into the maze through gaps between equipment, too narrow for pursuit vehicles under overhangs that blocked drone sight lines. After 15 minutes of silent navigation, they reached a structure that looked like every other abandoned HAB unit on the station, corroded, half-collapsed, marked by the universal decay of forgotten frontier outposts. Inside was different. Someone had reinforced the walls, patched the roof, created a space that held atmosphere and temperature within tolerable ranges. Makeshift furniture constructed from salvage. A work area with tools arranged in precise order. Living space carved from abandonment through patient effort. She gestured toward a low platform that served as seating. Jack sat noting how her movements carried no wasted motion. Efficiency learned through necessity. From a storage container, she retrieved a medical kit, not Colonial Bureau standard issue, but older military surplus. Jack recognized the packaging, Desert Storm era, designed for field combat situations. His era. She knelt beside him, pulling back his torn shirt to expose the shrapnel wound. Her fingers probed the injury with surprising gentleness. Professional assessment, checking for depth in foreign objects. When she looked up, something flickered in her amber eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. Jack's voice came steady despite the pain. "You've done field medicine." Her hands continued their examination, but her words carried weight beyond their simplicity. "I've done many things I don't talk about." She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with antiseptic that burned like fire through damaged tissue. Her technique spoke of training, real medical knowledge, applied under primitive conditions. Jack studied her face as she worked the concentration. The careful precision, the subtle tension that suggested this act of healing carried significance beyond simple first aid. When she finished bandaging, she sat back on her heels. For the first time, Jack noticed the brand mark on her neck, partially hidden by the collar of her ragged shirt. 2 letters and 3 numbers. BS-247. Breeding stock designation. Military classification for biological assets deemed suitable for genetic harvesting and controlled reproduction. His stomach turned. He'd seen those marks before years ago in classified briefings about programs that officially didn't exist. Projects that treated living beings as resources to be exploited and discarded when they failed to meet specifications. Her voice broke the silence, carrying a question that sounded like a test. "Why do you keep coming back?" Jack's confusion must have shown, because she clarified with a gesture toward the salvage yards beyond the HAB unit walls. "Every day. You survey, you check equipment. You could send drones, but you come yourself." He hadn't realized she'd been watching. The thought should have unsettled him, but instead it explained certain anomalies he'd noticed. Equipment moved. Work completed that shouldn't have been possible with station personnel, the sense of presence in supposedly empty sectors. His answer came without conscious thought, truth shaped by exhaustion and blood loss, and the strange intimacy of having this woman's hands on his injuries. Because nobody should be this alone. Something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but a fractional relaxation of the walls she maintained against the world. She stood moving to another storage container, returning with field rations, Colonial Bureau standard issue, probably salvaged from abandoned supply caches. They ate in silence, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the station's failing infrastructure. Jack's tactical mind cataloged details despite his fatigue. The HAB unit's reinforcements suggested engineering knowledge. The tools were maintained with obsessive care. Most telling, his portable scanner, still clipped to his belt, registered electromagnetic signatures consistent with classified military technology in active operations somewhere within 30 meters. His gaze moved across the work area, landing on a partially disassembled terraforming console. Not salvage stripped for parts, but a complete unit undergoing systematic repair. The kind of repair that required deep technical knowledge, security clearances, and access to documentation that civilians shouldn't possess. She noticed his attention. For a moment, something like defiance flickered across her features, a silent challenge. Yes, I have skills they didn't want me to keep. What are you going to do about it? Jack's scanner chirped softly. He glanced at the display, seeing electromagnetic patterns that matched military-grade processing cores. Active systems, networked infrastructure, in an abandoned sector that officially contained nothing but stripped wreckage. When he looked up, she was watching him with the intensity of someone waiting for judgment, waiting to see if this stranger would report her, expose her, drag her back into whatever hell she'd escaped from. Jack powered down the scanner deliberately, letting her see the motion. Then he tucked it away and met her amber gaze with the steadiness of someone making a choice. His voice carried the weight of commitment. I never saw anything. Just broken equipment and empty spaces. Relief didn't touch her expression, but something deeper shifted trust, beginning its tentative emergence. She nodded once, acknowledgement without words. They fell into routine after that. Jack returned to his survey work the following morning, documenting terraforming hub status with the thoroughness Colonial Bureau contracts demanded. When his path brought him to Sector 7, which it did with increasing frequency, he found her working in the salvage yards, her massive frame handling equipment that should have required mechanical assistance. He started bringing extra water rations. She accepted them with the pragmatism of someone who understood survival required accepting help when offered. No gratitude necessary. Just the silent acknowledgement that resources shared were resources secured. On the third day, equipment malfunctioned during Jack's diagnostic work. A plasma coupling ruptured, spraying superheated gas in an arc that would have taken his hand if he hadn't jerked back. The containment housing melted, structural integrity collapsing as feedback surged through connected systems. She appeared from wherever she'd been watching, moving with decisive speed. Her violet hands gripped the housing's base plates, ignoring the heat that would have seared human flesh and wrenched the entire assembly free of its mounting. Then she reached into the exposed mechanics with the confidence of someone who knew exactly which relay to disconnect, which circuit to ground, which fail-safe to manually trigger. The plasma vent shut down in seconds. The equipment fell silent, dangerous crisis averted through knowledge and capability that shouldn't have existed in someone wearing a breeding stock brand. Jack stared at the sophisticated shutdown sequence she just executed. Military hardware, classified systems, procedures that required clearances he'd never held even during his active service years. She wiped plasma residue from her hands with the casual motion of someone accustomed to handling hazardous materials. When she noticed his scrutiny, no explanation came. Just that same defiant question hidden in amber eyes. What are you going to do about what you've seen? His voice stayed level. Where did you learn that? She turned away, returning to whatever work she'd been pursuing before his crisis interrupted. The motion itself was answer enough. Boundaries established, questions declined. Her past remained her own unless she chose to share it. But Jack's medical training, honed through thousands of combat triage situations, caught details that civilians would miss. The way she moved suggested neural pathways reinforced through repetitive training. The speed of her reactions indicated augmented reflexes. The precision of her technical work revealed education far beyond standard military engineering courses. He pulled out his portable medical scanner, different from the electromagnetic unit designed for biological assessment. A casual gesture, checking his own injury to ensure the bandaging she'd applied was holding. But the scanner's field was broad enough to catch peripheral readings. The display showed her biosignature, and Jack's heart rate spiked. Genetic markers that registered as partially human, partially something else. Moriarty's placement that followed human template, outbind, but scaled and reinforced in ways that suggested deliberate biological engineering. Neural structures that indicated cranial augmentation at the molecular level. Not breeding stock, not even close. This was military bioengineering at the highest classification levels. The kind of program that produced super soldiers, deep space combat operatives, assets designed for missions that regular humans couldn't survive. She caught him looking at the scanner. Her expression hardened, muscles tensing, as if preparing for fight or flight. despite knowing she could tear him apart if threatened. Jack powered the scanner down, deleted the readings with deliberate motions she could see. Then he met her gaze and spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who'd made his decision. You're not breeding stock. You never were. Something cracked in her armor. Not collapse, but the first hairline fracture in walls built from years of degradation and survival. Her voice came rough with emotion she couldn't quite suppress. They said I was too big, too strong, too difficult to control, unfit for the genetic lines they wanted to preserve. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd heard similar rationalizations before in classified briefings about programs that reduce people to biological resources. The bureaucratic language that made atrocity sound like quality control. They were wrong. She turned away, but not before he saw the moisture gathering in her amber eyes. The wounds that physical violence left were visible, mapped in scar tissue across her body. The wounds that systematic dehumanization carved went deeper, invisible, but infinitely more damaging. That night she told him her name, Zirith. Not the designation number burned into her neck, but the name given by whatever people or culture had existed before colonial bureau classifications stripped identity away. Jack shared his own history in return. Desert Storm medic, 47 lives saved through field surgery under combat conditions. Then the shuttle crash 8 years ago, his wife Sarah dying in his arms while he tried everything his training had taught him, every procedure and technique, and watching it fail anyway. The guilt that followed him across a dozen frontier postings, always choosing the hardest assignments, the most dangerous locations, places where failure might finally catch up. Zirith listened without judgment. When he finished, she spoke with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who understood survival's true cost. You couldn't save her, but you're still trying to save everyone else. The observation hit harder than she probably intended. Jack had spent 8 years running from that truth, burying it under dangerous work in isolated postings. Having it stated so plainly by someone he barely knew should have felt like violation. Instead, it felt like release. They fell into rhythm after that. Jack's survey work brought him to Sector 7 every day, and they worked side by side with the comfortable silence of people who didn't need constant conversation to maintain connection. She taught him things about the terraforming equipment that hadn't been in any manual, tricks learned through hands-on experience, shortcuts that only someone with deep technical knowledge would recognize. He shared his medical expertise in return, showing her proper wound care techniques, explaining human physiology in ways that helped her understand her own hybrid biology. Her questions revealed gaps in her education. Military programs had focused on combat applications, not comprehensive understanding. Jack filled those gaps when he could, treating her intellect with the respect it deserved. On the 5th day, heat stress from defective atmospheric processors forced them to take shelter during midday hours. They retreated to her HAB unit, sharing water rations while radiation warnings scrolled across Jack's communicator. Outside, the desert burned under a sun that Carrick Station 7's failing infrastructure couldn't properly filter. Zirith broke the silence with a question that had clearly been building. How old are you? Jack's mouth twisted in something between a smile and a grimace. 68. Old enough that Colonial Bureau would have retired me 5 years ago if I'd let them. She studied his face with that same analytical intensity she applied to technical problems. You move like military. Your hands know combat medicine, but you work as a contract surveyor. It wasn't a question, but explanation felt necessary anyway. After Sarah died, I couldn't stay in one place, couldn't maintain the connections that made civilian life work. Survey contracts let me move every few months, stay busy, avoid the parts of life that require emotional investment. Zirith nodded slowly, understanding written in her expression. Running, but still serving. The accuracy of her assessment settled into Jack's chest like a weight. 8 years of telling himself he'd simply chosen different work, that his decisions were rational career moves rather than flight from trauma and failure. Having the truth spoken aloud by someone who recognized the patterns because she lived her own version of them. His voice came quieter. What are you running from? She was silent long enough that Jack thought she wouldn't answer. Then she reached up, pulling back the collar that partially concealed her brand mark. The scar tissue around BS 247 told stories that words couldn't fully capture: chemical burns from restraint collars, surgical marks from forced medical procedures, the systematic degradation of being treated as property rather than person. Everything they did, everything they wanted me to be, everything I refused. Jack's tactical mind assembled fragments into disturbing pictures. Military bioengineering programs that created enhanced soldiers, breeding protocols designed to preserve valuable genetic traits, assets that failed quality control metrics being discarded to frontier stations where oversight was minimal and disappearances went unremarked. His med scanner would have revealed more details about her biology, but he deleted those readings and wouldn't take new ones without permission. Her body's history was hers to share or withhold. Instead, he asked the question that mattered. The kill switch chip, is it still active? Her hand moved unconsciously to the base of her skull, fingers tracing the small ridge where something had been implanted beneath skin and bone. They told me if I ever left Carrick Station 7, it would activate. 30 seconds of neural disruption, then brain death. Jack's stomach clenched. He'd heard about termination chips in classified briefings, illegal under 3 different treaties, but deployed anyway by programs that operated beyond legal oversight. The threat kept valuable assets contained without requiring physical barriers or constant monitoring. Have you tested the range limits? She shook her head. Testing means dying if they were telling the truth. They sat in silence while that reality settled between them. Zareth's entire existence confined to a salvage yard on a failing frontier station, her freedom measured in kilometers she couldn't cross without risking immediate death. Property that had escaped its designated purpose, but remained leashed by technology embedded in her own nervous system. Jack's mind turned towards solutions with the methodical approach that had kept him alive through combat medicine. Termination chips were sophisticated, but they were still technology. Scanners could map their architecture. Surgical tools could extract them. The mortality rate would be significant, 60% or higher, depending on placement and integration with surrounding tissue, but it was possible. Before he could voice those thoughts, Zareth's posture suddenly shifted. She moved to the HAB unit's small window, peering toward the eastern approaches with tension that raised Jack's threat awareness. Her voice came tight. Someone's coming. Multiple vehicles. Jack joined her at the window, pulling out his scanner. 3 Colonial Bureau transports approaching Sector 7, information followed by a heavier vehicle that registered as military-grade armor and weapon systems. Not survey crew, not maintenance personnel. This was security response. His blood chilled as memory connected patterns. The drones that had hunted him yesterday, the ones Zarath had destroyed. Colonial Bureau would have recovered the wreckage by now, analyzed the damage patterns, identified the massive kinetic force that could only come from enhanced biological strength. They'd come for her, and they'd come prepared. Jack's tactical assessment completed in seconds. 3 transports meant at least 12 personnel. The heavy vehicle suggested they expected resistance. Standard procedure for retrieving escaped military assets would be overwhelming force combined with termination chip activation to ensure compliance. He turned to Zareth, seeing the same cold understanding in her amber eyes. She'd known this moment would eventually arrive. Property didn't stay lost forever. Systems designed to track and recover valuable assets were patient and thorough. His hand found his communicator, pulling up station schematics. Sector 7 had dozens of potential hiding places, but nowhere that would conceal someone of Zareth's size and distinctive appearance from thermal scanners and biological sensors. They could run, but the termination chip meant she couldn't leave the station. Nowhere to go except deeper into the salvage yards, buying hours instead of freedom. The vehicles were closer now, close enough that Jack's scanner identified individual biosignatures. 12 soldiers as predicted, all carrying weapons configured for non-lethal takedown, plus 1 command-level officer whose signature registered in his scanner's database with a name that hit Jack like physical impact. Commander Elena Voss, his old squad leader from Desert Storm, the medic who'd worked beside him saving lives under fire, a soldier he'd trusted with his life, and the lives of wounded personnel bleeding out in desert sand. 8 years since he'd last seen her, 8 years since she'd been present at Sarah's death, offering condolences that felt hollow because no words could fill that void. He'd thought she'd left military service, moved into civilian life, like so many veterans who couldn't reconcile duty with conscience. Apparently, she'd moved into a different kind of service instead. The vehicles reached the outer perimeter of Sector 7, stopping in a formation that suggested tactical planning and preparation. Soldiers dismounted with practiced efficiency weapons ready, but not aimed postures suggesting readiness rather than aggression. They weren't here to kill. They were here to reclaim property. Commander Voss emerged from the command vehicle, her appearance unchanged, except for insignia Jack didn't recognize. Not standard Colonial Bureau markings. Something else. Something that suggested clearances beyond normal military hierarchy. Her voice carried across the salvage yards through amplified speakers, professional and controlled. Jack Morrison, we know you're there. We know you've been in contact with asset BS-247. Come out. Bring the asset. Nobody needs to get hurt. Jack looked at Zirith. Her expression had hardened into the mask of someone who'd survived by accepting inevitability. She knew what came next. Capture. Return to whatever facility held her breeding stock designation. Continuation of the systematic degradation that had defined her existence before escape. His hand moved to his belt, checking the plasma cutter and improvised EMP charges he carried for equipment work. Inadequate against 12 soldiers in military-grade hardware, but tools were tools. In combat medicine, you worked with what you had available. Zirith's massive hand settled on his shoulder, gentle despite her strength. Don't. They'll kill you. Jack met her amber gaze, seeing resignation and something else beneath it, the faint ember of hope that someone might choose differently than expected. That being treated as property wasn't inevitable. That somewhere in the universe, human beings still existed who would risk themselves for principles that transcended survival calculations. His voice came steady with decision made. I already lost one person I couldn't save. I won't lose another. He stepped toward the door before she could stop him, moving with the purposeful calm that combat had taught him. Fear was information. Pain was data. You acknowledged both and moved anyway because the mission demanded it. Outside the salvage yard's afternoon heat wrapped around him like liquid fire. Commander Voss stood 30 meters away, soldiers arranged in tactical formation behind her. Her expression registered surprise and something more complicated that might have been regret. Jack, her voice dropped the amplification, speaking human to human rather than officer to target. I thought you were dead. The reports said you disappeared after Sarah's funeral. He walked forward slowly, hands visible but not raised. Surrender posture without actual surrender. I got better at disappearing. Frontier contracts, remote postings, places where oversight was minimal and questions were fewer. Voss studied him with the assessment of someone trained to read tactical situations. And now you're interfering with military asset recovery. That's a serious offense. Jack stopped 5 meters away, close enough for conversation without amplification. She's not an asset. She's a person. Something flickered across Voss's face, acknowledgement perhaps, or the ghost of principles that military service had eroded over years of following orders that required ethical compromises. Her response came formal, as if reading from a manual. Asset BS-247 is military property under classified research protocols. She represents significant investment in biological engineering research. Her recovery is mandated by directives that supersede local jurisdiction. Jack's jaw tightened. You're talking about a living being like she's equipment. Voss's expression hardened. I'm following orders, same as we both did in Desert Storm, same as every soldier who understands that military effectiveness requires difficult decisions. Difficult decisions, Jack's voice carried acid. Is that what they're calling systematic dehumanization now? Voss's hand moved to her belt, pulling out a small remote device. Jack, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The asset has a termination chip. I can activate it from here. Bring her out peacefully, or I'll activate the chip and recover her unconscious body. Either way, she comes with us. Jack's tactical mind raced through options. He could rush Voss, try to disable her before she triggered the remote. 12 soldiers would cut him down before he covered half the distance. He could run back to the HAB unit, try to barricade with Zirith inside. The soldiers would breach the walls within minutes. He could try reasoning with someone who'd already chosen her path. Or he could acknowledge that sometimes in combat medicine, you face situations where every option led to loss, where the best you could do was minimize damage and hope for extraction opportunities later. His voice came quiet. Elena, you know this is wrong. For just a moment, grief touched her expression. The soldier who'd worked beside him, saving lives, recognized the soldier standing before her, trying to do the same. Then duty reasserted itself, and her thumb moved toward the activation button on the remote. Jack's med scanner, still clipped to his belt, chirped an alert. He glanced at the display, seeing biosignature readings that made his heart rate spike. The scanner had detected his own body chemistry, elevated cortisol, adrenaline, the stress markers of someone facing mortal threat. But buried in those readings was another signature, a tracking beacon embedded in the scanner itself. Standard Colonial Bureau procedure for equipment issued to contract workers in remote locations. The beacon that had been transmitting his location since he'd arrived on Carrick Station 7. The beacon that had led them directly to Zyrith. Jack's stomach turned as understanding completed. He hadn't been surveying Sector 7 because of random contract assignment. He'd been placed there deliberately. The equipment malfunctions that required his specific expertise. The timing that brought him to Zyrith's location. All of it choreographed by someone who knew his psychological profile, his tendency toward protecting the vulnerable, his inability to walk away from someone in need. They'd used him as bait, as tracking device, as the unwitting tool that would locate an asset who'd successfully hidden for months or years. His gaze moved to Voss, seeing acknowledgement in her expression. She'd known. She'd probably been part of planning the operation from the start. Before he could voice his fury and betrayal, Zereth emerged from the HAB unit behind him. She moved with the deliberate calm of someone who'd accepted inevitability, her massive frame casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. Her voice carried across the salvage yard. Let him go. He didn't know. Your quarrel is with me. The soldiers shifted weapons, tracking toward her despite their non-lethal configuration. Zereth ignored them, walking forward to stand beside Jack. Her presence was solidarity without hope, companionship in the face of capture. Voss studied them both, her tactical mind clearly processing the dynamics. Then she spoke with the cold professionalism of someone delivering prepared statements. Jack Morrison, you're under arrest for interference with military operations and unauthorized contact with classified assets. Asset BS-247, you're remanded to military custody for transport back to research facility. Her thumb pressed the activation button on the remote. Zerith staggered, massive hands moving to her head as the termination chip activated. But instead of collapse and unconsciousness, she remained standing. Pain twisted her features, but she stayed upright through what should have been incapacitating neural disruption. Voss's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. She checked the remote, verified the activation signal, pressed the button again. Zerith took a step forward, then another, fighting through whatever the chip was inflicting on her nervous system. Her voice came strained but defiant. I told you, I'm not easy to control. The soldiers raised weapons, but hesitation marked their movements. Their briefing had probably emphasized the asset's value, the investment. She represented the importance of avoiding permanent damage. Shooting her would violate those parameters, even if weapons were set for non-lethal takedown. Jack moved before conscious thought completed, placing himself between Zyrith and the soldiers. It was tactical stupidity. It was emotional reaction overriding survival instinct. It was the only thing he could do when watching someone fight for basic dignity against a system designed to crush it. Voss's voice cut through the tension. Stand down, Morrison. You can't win this. Jack's response came with the certainty of someone who'd stopped caring about winning. Maybe not, but I can make you work for it. Something shifted in the salvage yards around them. Equipment that should have been inert suddenly hummed with power. Lights activated across abandoned structures. And from the maze of machinery and debris, figures emerged. Massive violet-skinned forms moving with coordinated purpose. Not just one or two, dozens. Krevajal's refugees who'd been hiding in Sector 7's abandoned sections, watching and waiting. Zerith wasn't alone after all. She'd never been alone. They surrounded the Colonial Bureau forces in seconds, vastly outnumbering the soldiers, despite the humans' superior weapons. The tactical situation had inverted. Voss and her team were now the ones trapped, outflanked, facing overwhelming force. An elderly Krev stepped forward, his violet skin weathered with age and scarring, his voice carrying authority. Commander Voss, you come here for one of our people. You will leave empty-handed. Jack's mind cataloged the tactical shift. The Krev had maintained stealth discipline, revealing themselves only when necessary to protect Zerith. Military thinking, organized resistance. Voss's training was visible in her rapid assessment. They were outmatched in numbers, but she'd also played a card Jack hadn't anticipated. Her voice came calm, despite the reversed situation. You're right, I'll leave. But you have 48 hours before the chip kills her anyway. We built in redundancies precisely because we knew asset BS-247 might resist initial activation. She pulled out a second device displaying a countdown timer. 47 hours, 59 minutes. The only facility with deactivation codes is Research Facility Sigma-7. You want to savor her? Bring her to us voluntarily. Jack's med scanner confirmed the biochemical changes. Zyrith's nervous system was already starting to degrade under sustained chip activation. Without intervention, Voss's timeline was accurate. They had 2 days before Zyrith died. Voss gestured to her soldiers. They began tactical withdrawal, maintaining defensive formation, but not engaging. Professional military discipline, recognizing when continuing confrontation served no purpose. Before boarding her transport, Voss looked back at Jack and with something that might have been genuine regret. I'm sorry, Jack. About Sarah, about this, about all of it. Then her expression hardened with words that carried different weight. Your wife didn't die in an accident. She found classified documentation about Project Monarch. They killed her to protect the program. You've been a tool since the day she died. They knew you'd come to Carrick 7, knew you'd make contact. You were bait from the beginning. The vehicles departed, leaving them in the salvage yard as Voss's revelations settled like poison. Sarah, murdered. 8 years of guilt over failure that was actually assassination. 8 years of self-blame for something he couldn't have prevented because it was never accident. Jack's hands shook, not from fear, from rage that had nowhere to go except inward burning through the careful control he'd maintained since her death. The elderly Krev moved beside him, weathered hands settling on his shoulder. I am Elder Mac. We have watched you these weeks, Jack Morrison. Watched how you treated her with respect when others saw only property. That is why we reveal ourselves now. Jack forced his mind back to immediate crisis. Grief and rage could wait. Zyrith was dying. The countdown on his scanner read 47, 58, 12, and falling. Can you remove the chip? Elder Mac's question carried the weight of desperate hope. Jack pulled up detailed bioscan data studying the chip's architecture through external sensors. Deep neural placement, integration with spinal nerve clusters. Removal would require precision surgery under field conditions with equipment that barely qualified as adequate. His voice came steady despite the impossibility. 60% mortality rate, maybe higher, but she dies anyway if we do nothing. Zyrith's massive form swayed, neural disruption taking its toll. But her amber eyes found his, and her voice carried determination that pain couldn't break. Then you have your answer. I'd rather die free than live as property. Elder Mac gestured and Krev warriors moved to support Zyrith. We have medical supplies, salvaged equipment, whatever you need. Jack's tactical mind shifted into operational mode. I need surgical tools, stabilizers, imaging equipment. And I need them in the next 6 hours because that's how long she has before neural damage becomes irreversible. The Krev community mobilized with efficiency that spoke of military discipline. Within 30 minutes, they'd assembled supplies from hidden caches, medical equipment salvaged from abandoned facilities, tools maintained in secret for years, resources accumulated against the day they might need to save one of their own. Jack worked through equipment inventory, assembling what he'd need for surgery that would either save Zyrith or kill her. His hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who'd performed battlefield medicine under conditions that made this look almost acceptable. The countdown continued its relentless fall. 23, 41. Every second that passed meant more damage, more risk, less chance of survival. But 60% mortality was infinitely better than 100% certainty. Jack looked at Zyrith, at Elder Mac, at the community of Krev, who'd survived in shadows for years. Then let's get started. We have a life to save. The medical bay's security lock yielded to override codes that shouldn't have worked after 8 years of disuse. Jack's fingers moved across the access panel with muscle memory from a different life when he'd held clearances that mattered and authority that opened doors. The codes recognized his biometrics despite time and distance. Colonial Bureau systems slow to purge former personnel from their databases. Beside him, Zyrith stood, with tension radiating through her massive frame. 46 hours remained on the countdown. Every minute that passed meant more neural degradation, more damage accumulating in tissue that might already be beyond saving. The door slid open. Motion sensors activated emergency lighting, revealing rows of surgical equipment covered in dust but still functional. Carrick Station 7's medical facilities had been abandoned when budget cuts reduced personnel, but the hardware remained expensive infrastructure that cost more to remove than to leave dormant. Jack moved through the space with professional assessment, cataloging available resources. Surgical laser still charged, neural imaging array outdated but operational. Medication stores mostly expired, but some compounds remained viable. He'd worked with worse in field hospitals where incoming wounded overwhelmed supply chains. Elder Mac's warriors helped carry Zirith to the surgical table, their movements gentle, despite their strength. She settled onto the platform with controlled breathing, preparing herself for what came next. Jack scrubbed his hands with antiseptic that probably lost potency years ago, but was better than nothing. His medical kit came out, instruments arranged in precise order on a sterile field. Everything he'd need placed exactly where muscle memory would find them when conscious thought became impossible. The neural imaging array powered up, displaying Zyrith's brainstem and spinal column in three-dimensional detail. The chip sat exactly where military bioengineers had placed it, wrapped around nerve clusters that controlled basic autonomic functions. Extracting it meant operating on tissue that kept Zirith breathing, kept her heart beating, kept the electrical signals flowing that defined consciousness. His voice came steady, addressing Zyrith directly. "I won't lie about the pain. We don't have enough anesthetic to keep you fully unconscious. You'll feel most of it." Her jaw set with determination. "I've felt worse. Do what you need to do." Jack administered what anesthetic they had, enough to dull pain, but not eliminated enough to reduce shock response, but not guarantee survival if complications arose. Zirith's hybrid physiology meant standard dosing charts were approximations at best. He was operating on educated guesses and hope. The surgical laser activated, adjusting power levels to cut tissue without causing thermal damage. His hands steadied as training overrode fear. In the field, you didn't have time for doubt. You assessed, decided, acted, and dealt with consequences afterward. The first incision opened skin and muscle with precision measured in millimeters. Blood welled up purple instead of red, but the clotting cascade followed patterns Jack recognized from trauma surgery. He cleared the surgical field, exposing deeper structures. Zirith's breathing hitched, not panic but pain breaking through inadequate anesthesia. Her hands gripped the table edges, metal groaning under pressure that would have torn human-made supports apart. Elder Mac placed his weathered hand on her shoulder, offering solidarity that words couldn't provide. Jack worked deeper, following the imaging array's guidance. Nerve tissue appeared in his surgical field, delicate bundles that carried signals between brain and body. The chip had integrated itself into those structures, microscopic tendrils extending into neural pathways, with the deliberate architecture of military bioengineering. Removing it meant cutting connections that the chip had spent years establishing. Some damage was inevitable. The question was whether that damage would be compatible with continued life. His hands moved with the muscle memory of thousands of procedures performed under conditions ranging from ideal to catastrophic. The laser found the chip's housing scoring lines along its surface, where organic tissue met inorganic technology. Nanosutures would seal the wounds afterward, but first he had to extract the device without severing anything critical. Zirith's entire body tensed, massive muscles locking as pain overwhelmed her capacity to process it. Her voice came through gritted teeth, words forced out against agony. "Keep going." Jack's hands never stopped moving. In combat medicine, you learn to work through screaming, through begging, through every expression of suffering that humans could vocalize. You maintained focus because the alternative was watching someone bleed out while you froze. The chip came loose in increments, micron by micron, as Jack separated it from surrounding tissue. His display showed neural activity fluctuating, dangerous patterns that indicated approaching crisis. If her autonomic systems crashed before he finished extraction, no amount of surgical skill would save her. 30 minutes into the procedure, Zirith lost consciousness. Not from anesthesia, but from pain exceeding her nervous system's capacity to remain aware. Her breathing continued, shallow but steady. Heart rate elevated but stable. Jack's training recognized the signs of a body shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core survival. He accelerated his work, trading some precision for speed, because time was now the limiting factor. The chip separated from its final anchor points and Jack lifted it free with forceps designed for handling contaminated materials. The device went into a sealed container, evidence and threat, both something that would need careful disposal later. If there was a later, the surgical field was chaos. Neural tissue damaged by extraction blood vessels requiring cauterization structures that needed reconstruction before Xyrith's body could begin natural healing processes. Jack worked with the focused intensity of someone operating on the edge of possible, his hands moving faster than conscious thought, driven by training that had been drilled into reflexes decades ago. Nanosutures went in thousands of microscopic threads that would guide tissue regeneration at the cellular level. Stabilizers flooded the area, preventing neural inflammation that would kill as surely as the chip itself. Jack's scanner monitored Xyrith's vital signs, watching for the cascade failures that would indicate he'd lost her. 4 hours after beginning, Jack placed the final suture. The surgical field was closed, bandaged, protected against infection with everything their limited supplies could provide. Xyrith's breathing had steadied. Her heart rate was dropping toward normal ranges. Neural activity showed patterns consistent with deep unconsciousness rather than permanent damage. Jack's hands shook as adrenaline drained from his system, leaving exhaustion and the cold weight of understanding what he'd just attempted. 60% mortality, he'd told her. That meant 40% survival, but also meant more people died than lived. The statistics were real, and he wouldn't know which side of them Xyrith had fallen until she either woke or didn't. Elder Mac helped move her to a recovery area where Krev could maintain watch. Jack followed his body, moving on autopilot while his mind cataloged everything that could still go wrong. Infection despite sterile procedures, neural inflammation despite stabilizers, cascade failures in systems that appeared stable but were actually damaged beyond recovery. He checked his scanner, seeing the countdown that had driven their urgency. 39 hours, 12 minutes remaining. But the chip was gone, its termination protocol disconnected from Xyrith's nervous system. Voss's threat had been neutralized, even if the cost of neutralizing it remained uncertain. Jack sat beside Xyrith's still form, monitoring vital signs that remained stubbornly within acceptable ranges. Not recovered, but not dying either. Existing in the gray zone where outcomes could tip either direction based on factors beyond medical control. Elder Mac brought water and field rations. Jack accepted both, mechanically consuming calories his body needed but couldn't taste. The Krev elder settled into silence beside him, sharing vigil in the way that people did when words couldn't change outcomes. Hours passed. Station systems cycled through their automated routines, maintaining minimal life support in Sector 7's abandoned areas. Jack's scanner continued its patient monitoring, displaying biosignatures that showed neither improvement nor decline. At hour 7 post-surgery, Xyrith's neural activity spiked. Not the smooth patterns of consciousness returning, but chaotic signals that indicated something going wrong. Jack was on his feet, immediately pulling out his medical kit, preparing interventions for complications he'd anticipated but hoped wouldn't manifest. Her body convulsed, massive muscles contracting with enough force to crack the reinforced platform where she lay. Elder Mac and other Krev moved to hold her steady, preventing movement that could tear surgical repairs. Jack administered additional stabilizers, pushing dosages to maximum safe levels, and praying her hybrid physiology could handle the chemical load. The seizure lasted 90 seconds that felt like hours. Then Xyrith's body went limp again, neural activity dropping back toward baseline patterns. Jack's scanner showed damage some of the nanosutures had torn, requiring repair, but nothing immediately catastrophic. He worked quickly, reopening sections of the surgical site to replace damaged sutures and verify that no bleeding had started in areas he couldn't monitor externally. His hands moved with the exhausted precision of someone operating on reserves they didn't have, driven by necessity rather than capacity. When he finished the second time, Jack's vision was starting to gray at the edges. Exhaustion combined with stress, his 68-year-old body reminding him that he couldn't operate at combat tempo the way he had in Desert Storm. Age imposed limitations that training couldn't fully overcome. Elder Mac's hand on his shoulder carried gentle insistence. "You need rest, Jack Morrison. We will watch her." Jack wanted to argue, wanted to maintain vigil until Xyrith either woke or didn't, but his body was making the decision for him. He managed to reach a nearby platform before collapse claimed him, pulling him into sleep that was more like losing consciousness than genuine rest. He dreamed of Sarah. Not the crash that killed her, but earlier memories, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him after he returned from deployment, the plans they'd made for a future that never arrived. In the dream, she told him something important, words he couldn't quite hear, and he woke with her voice still echoing in his mind. 12 hours had passed. Jack's scanner showed mid-morning station time, though Sector 7's failed lighting systems made day and night equally dark. He pulled himself upright, every muscle protesting movement, and checked Zirith immediately. Her vital signs had stabilized. Not just stable, but improving neural activity, showing patterns consistent with natural sleep rather than unconscious trauma response. The seizure had been an acute crisis, not the beginning of cascade failure. Jack allowed himself a breath that felt like the first real oxygen he'd had in days. Not victory yet, but not defeat either. She was still alive. The surgery had worked well enough to give her body a chance at recovery. Elder Mac appeared with hot food, actual nutrition, rather than field rations. The Krev had been cooking somewhere, creating community meals from salvaged supplies. Jack accepted the bowl, gratefully tasting flavors for the first time since the surgery began. How long until we know? Elder Mac's question carried the weight of someone who'd watched too many people die. Jack swallowed food that suddenly tasted like ash. 48 to 72 hours for neural healing to either succeed or fail. If she makes it that long without major complications, survival probability increases to 90%. The elder nodded slowly, weathered features showing understanding. And if complications occur, then I do what I can with what we have and hope it's enough. They sat together, sharing the silence of people who understood that sometimes hope was the only resource available. Around them, Sector 7 continued its existence, on the margins, Krev moving through their hidden community, maintaining routines that gave structure to lives lived in permanent uncertainty. Jack's communicator chirped, breaking the quiet. He checked the display, seeing an incoming transmission on emergency frequencies. Colonial Bureau channels encrypted, but not heavily secured. Someone wanted him to receive this message. He activated playback. Commander Voss's face appeared tired but controlled, speaking with the careful precision of someone choosing words under scrutiny. Jack, I know you can hear this. The chip's telemetry stopped transmitting 8 hours ago. Either you removed it or she's dead. If she's dead, my condolences. If you removed it, Voss paused, something like respect flickering across her features. Then you're a better surgeon than I gave you credit for. Her expression hardened. But it doesn't change anything. Asset BS-247 remains military property under classified protocols. Her escape doesn't terminate that designation. And now you've added theft of military supplies to your charges. Colonial Bureau wants you both in custody. Voss leaned closer to the camera, and her voice dropped into a register that suggested words meant for Jack, specifically rather than official record. There's something else you should know. Your contract wasn't random. Sarah's death wasn't an accident. Jack's blood turned to ice. She found classified documentation about Project Monarch while working Colonial Bureau logistics. Names, locations, protocols that officially didn't exist. She was going to go public. Voss's face showed genuine grief. They made it look like shuttle malfunction. They've been watching you since, waiting to see if she'd shared information before they killed her. When Asset BS-247 escaped, someone remembered that you were on Carrick Station 7. They thought maybe you'd make contact. The transmission flickered, and when Voss's face reappeared, her expression had changed. Not the controlled professionalism of a military officer, but something rawer underneath. I didn't know, Jack. Not until after you'd been assigned here. By then, the operation was in motion. I tried to redirect it, tried to get you pulled, but I don't have that authority. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry about Sarah, about using you, about all of it. Another pause, longer this time. When Voss spoke again, her voice carried different weight. They have my daughter, Sarah Voss. She's 16. 2 years ago, she hacked Colonial Bureau systems looking for truth. They caught her. Now she's in detention on Brevi Station, Block 7. They told me if I cooperate, if I follow orders, maybe she gets released when she turns 18. Voss's eyes showed desperation that military discipline couldn't fully mask. I'm trapped, Jack. Every order I follow makes me complicit. Every order I refuse puts my daughter at risk. I don't know what to do. The transmission cut out, leaving Jack staring at blank display while his world reconfigured around information that made the past 8 years suddenly make horrible sense. Sarah hadn't died in random accident. She'd been murdered for discovering truths that powerful people wanted buried. And he'd been manipulated since turned into unwitting bait for catching escaped property that those same people wanted recovered. But Voss was trapped too, a parent being coerced through threats against her child. The enemy wasn't one person, it was the entire system that treated people as resources to be exploited or eliminated based on cost-benefit analysis. His hands clenched into fists, rage building in his chest like pressure that would either explode outward or implode into destruction. He wanted to scream, wanted to break something, wanted to hurt the people who'd systematically dismantled his life and turned tragedy into operational utility. Elder Mac's weathered hand settled on his shoulder again, grounding weight that pulled Jack back from the edge of doing something stupid. The Krev's voice came quiet with understanding. Revenge will not bring her back. Jack's breath shuddered out, anger draining into grief that he'd been carrying for 8 years without understanding its true source. Sarah hadn't died because he failed to save her. She died because she was murdered, and no amount of medical skill could protect against deliberate assassination. His voice came rough. They used her death, used my guilt, made me into a tool for hunting escaped prisoners. Yes, and now you must decide what you do with that knowledge. Jack looked at Zyrith's unconscious form, seeing someone else who'd been turned into property by systems that valued control over humanity. Someone who'd survived despite everything, who'd built life from salvage and refusal, who'd trusted him enough to let him cut into her brain with nothing but expired anesthesia and desperate hope. He couldn't bring Sarah back, couldn't undo 8 years of manipulation and grief, but he could protect the person lying before him. Could ensure that Voss and Colonial Bureau and everyone involved in Project Monarch paid price for treating living beings as resources to exploit. His communicator still displayed Voss's final transmission. Jack rewound it, studying her face frame by frame, reading micro-expressions that his combat training had taught him to recognize. Stress markers around her eyes, tension in her jaw, the specific pattern of muscle movement that indicated someone operating under duress. She'd called his assignment deliberate manipulation, but she'd also shared classified information potentially compromising her own position. That suggested divided loyalty, or at minimum, the kind of moral conflict that created exploitable vulnerabilities. Jack made a decision. He composed a response message, encrypting it with codes that Voss would recognize from their Desert Storm days. Codes that officially didn't exist anymore, but that shared history made meaningful. The message was simple. She survived. I know about Sarah. Both Sarahs. We need to talk. Face to face. Just you. Sector 7, perimeter. Sunset. He transmitted before second thoughts could intervene. Either Voss would respond, creating opportunity for something beyond simple opposition, or she'd use the information to tighten pursuit. Both outcomes provided more information than current stalemate. 30 minutes later, response came. Text only, no video or voice. I'll come alone. Sunset. Kill me if you want. Maybe I deserve it. Jack read the message 3 times, analyzing word choice and implications. Voss was either genuinely conflicted or she was setting a trap sophisticated enough to account for his tactical thinking. Either way, meeting provided more options than hiding in abandoned sectors while waiting for Zyrith to recover or die. Elder Mac watched preparations with the assessment of someone who'd seen too many plans go wrong. You trust her? Jack's mouth twisted. No. But sometimes you take meetings with people you don't trust because the alternative is fighting battles you can't win. Sunset on Carrick Station 7 meant the primary star's light shifting through atmosphere that poorly filtered radiation. Everything turned red-orange shadows lengthening across salvage yards until distinction between equipment and landscape became uncertain. Jack positioned himself with sight lines on the approaches back against solid cover weapons within reach but not drawn. Commander Voss appeared exactly on time, walking alone as promised. She wore standard Colonial Bureau uniform, but no armor, no visible weapons. Her hands stayed visible as she approached, moving with the careful deliberation of someone proving non-hostile intent. She stopped 10 meters away, speaking distance but far enough that sudden movement would give Jack time to react. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd stopped sleeping properly weeks ago. She really survived, Jack nodded once. Critical but stable. Better odds than doing nothing. Something like relief crossed Voss's face. I'm glad. Truly. She doesn't deserve what they did to her. None of them do, but you follow orders anyway. Voss's jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? You think I sleep well knowing I'm part of systems that reduce people to inventory. Jack's voice stayed level. Then stop. Walk away. Join the side that treats living beings like they matter. It's not that simple. They have my daughter Jack, Sarah. She's 16 in detention on Brevi Station, charged with crimes that carry life sentences. They told me if I cooperate, maybe she gets released. Jack's tactical assessment shifted, not divided loyalty, hostage situation. Voss wasn't conflicted, middle management. She was a parent being coerced through threats against her child. His voice softened slightly. Then we extract her. Where exactly? Voss's eyes widened. Brevi Station security would make this place look undefended. I didn't ask if it was possible. I asked where she is. Understanding crossed Voss's face, not hope exactly, but the first crack in the certainty that her situation was unsolvable. Block 7, Cell 47, High Security Ward. Jack filed the information, tactical mind, already sketching approaches despite knowing he lacked resources for serious extraction planning. But possibilities existed where before there'd been only opposition. Tell me about Project Monarch, everything. Voss glanced around as if surveillance might be listening despite Sector 7's abandoned status. Then she spoke quickly, words tumbling out like confession. Project Monarch wasn't just breeding program. It was attempt to create biological empire. They captured the last Krev queen 10 years ago, when Terran forces invaded her homeworld. Tried to force her to produce hybrid warriors. But Krev queens can't be forced. Their biology requires genuine bonding consent. Every artificial attempt failed. She paused, gathering thoughts. Zirith refused for 10 years. They used degradation, torture, systematic dehumanization to break her will. She never broke, just kept surviving, kept refusing. Finally, they gave up, classified her as defective breeding stock, and dumped her here where she'd eventually die without requiring official termination. Jack's respect for Zirith increased. 10 years of torture, and she'd maintained her essential self, her refusal to become what her captors demanded. How many others survived? Voss's expression showed genuine grief. None. Zirith is the last queen. Everyone else died in captivity. The program's been operating on hope that she'd break. Now that she's escaped, there's political pressure to terminate Project Monarch entirely. Jack's stomach turned. They'd committed genocide in pursuit of weapons they couldn't create. And now they wanted to kill the last survivor because she represented failure. His voice came cold. You're going to help us escape. All of us. Voss's laugh carried no humor. How I'm under surveillance. Communications monitored. Any deviation gets flagged. Then we make it look like you're following orders while actually undermining them. You're good at operational planning. Plan your way out. Something shifted in Voss's expression, possibility beginning its emergence. There might be a way. If the chip telemetry shows Zirith dead, they'll send recovery team for the body. If I volunteer to lead that team, Jack saw where she was going. You come with authorization, we stage compliance, but actually evacuate everyone. They think they're recovering corpse while we're escaping. It buys time, maybe enough to reach Brevi and extract Sarah. Voss's tactical mind engaged fully. But we'd need ship resources, documentation. The Krev have been surviving here for years. They've accumulated more than salvage. Jack had seen technology that shouldn't exist. And my codes apparently still work. They spent the next hour planning, combining frontier experience with institutional knowledge. The scheme was ambitious, probably stupid, definitely illegal. But it created pathway from opposition toward cooperation. As full darkness fell, Voss prepared to leave. Before going, she met Jack's gaze directly. Thank you for not killing me, for listening, for offering hope when I'd run out. Jack's response came quiet. Sarah would have wanted me to help, my Sarah. Yours too. Voss nodded, grief and determination mixing in her expression. Then she disappeared into darkness, leaving Jack with plans that would either save multiple lives or get everyone killed. He returned to find Zirith awake, not fully conscious but aware enough to track his movement with amber eyes that showed recognition. Her voice came barely above whisper. "You look terrible." Jack's laugh surprised him, genuine humor breaking through exhaustion. "You just had brain surgery and you're critiquing my appearance. Someone has to maintain standards." Her hand moved slightly and Jack took it, feeling violet fingers squeeze his with returning strength. He told her about Voss, about Sarah's murder, about plans forming to turn enemies into reluctant allies. She listened with the focus of someone conserving energy for essential processing. When he finished, her response carried certainty despite weakness. "We save her daughter. That's right. Even though it means risking exposure before you're recovered." Zirith's amber eyes held his, especially then. "We don't abandon people who need help. That's what makes us different." Jack felt something settle in his chest, not peace exactly, but alignment, purpose beyond survival. 3 days later, Zyrith could stand without assistance. Her neural function had recovered to 80% of baseline. Not perfect, but functional. The surgery had worked. More importantly, she revealed something else during recovery. Her hand moved to her abdomen in a gesture Jack's medical training immediately recognized. "How long have you known?" His voice came quiet. Her amber eyes showed understanding. "Since I woke." Krev Queen sensed conception immediately. Jack's scanner confirmed it. Hormonal markers indicating early pregnancy. Timeline matching their one night in the storm shelter, intimacy born from shared trauma and desperate connection. He should have felt panic. Instead, he felt determination crystallizing. His hand covered hers on her abdomen. "Then we definitely survived this. All three of us." Voss's authorization came through on schedule. Recovery team approved. Transport assigned. They had 48 hours before questions would be asked. The Krev community mobilized. 217 refugees preparing to abandon the only home they'd known for 8 years. Elder Mac organized them with military precision families grouped together, warriors maintaining security until final departure. Jack conducted final medical assessment of Zyrith. Neural function acceptable, surgical, site healing, but stress tolerance remained low. She'd be liability in combat. They both knew it. Neither mentioned it. Loading took 90 minutes. Krev moved through the process with disciplined efficiency. Voss's two-person escort helped genuine cooperation, replacing earlier opposition. The cargo vessel launched clean. No pursuit, no alarms. Just departure that looked like authorized recovery operation. 4 hours into flight, Voss's voice came through comms. "We're clear. Course laid for Brevi. 3 days if we don't encounter complications." Jack unsealed the container, helping Zirith into the cargo bay. 200 Krev filled every available space. They looked at Zirith with reverence that made Jack uncomfortable. Until Elder Mock stepped forward and spoke words that changed everything. "My queen, we have waited years to say this openly. We serve you. We follow you. Wherever you lead." Zirith's hand found Jack squeezing tight, not from weakness but from emotion. She'd thought herself alone. She'd never been alone. The journey to Brevi took 3 days of cramped quarters and careful planning. Jack taught combat medicine. Voss drilled young Krev named Keth in security protocols. They prepared for extraction that would either free them all or doom them permanently. On the final night before arrival, Jack found Zyrith in the observation section. She stood watching stars, one hand on her abdomen where their daughter grew. He moved beside her, afraid, terrified, of failing them, of dying before she's born, of bringing her into universe that destroyed my people. Jack's hand covered hers. "Then we make better universe. Starting with Brevi." They arrived at Brevi Station to organize chaos. Voss's authorization got them docked. Then the real work began. The detention block's security checkpoint loomed ahead, 2 guards scanning every badge with the bored efficiency of people who'd processed thousands of routine entries. Jack moved forward with the casual confidence of someone who belonged, forged credentials displayed prominently. Beside him, young Keth carried electronic countermeasures hidden in equipment cases, while Krev warriors Shan and Mira maintained positions that could shift from escort to assault within seconds. The guard's scanner processed Jack's badge. Verification routines checked against Brevi Station databases, systems Voss had spent 3 days infiltrating and modifying. The scanner flashed red, authorization denied. Jack's hand moved toward his weapon before conscious thought completed. The guard's expression shifted from routine boredom to alert suspicion. This badge is flagged. Step aside for secondary screening. Keth's electronic countermeasure activated pulse of electromagnetic disruption that fried the guard's scanner and disabled nearby surveillance equipment. Temporary effect may be 90 seconds before backup systems engaged, but 90 seconds was enough. Jack moved fast, plasma cutter igniting as he approached the checkpoint barrier. The fortified door represented obstacle that force couldn't overcome quickly, but Keth's hacking tools found the electronic lock's vulnerabilities faster than physical assault. The door unsealed. Guards reached for weapons. Shan and Mira intercepted with brutal efficiency warriors who'd trained for combat their entire lives. Not lethal strikes they'd discussed avoiding kills when possible, but incapacitating force that left guards unconscious within seconds. They were through the checkpoint, racing down corridors towards Cell 47. Alarms would sound soon. Security teams would mobilize. The window Voss had promised was collapsing faster than planned. Cell 47's door carried biometric lock that required authorized handprint. Keth's tools couldn't bypass that quickly. Jack pulled out plasma cutter adjusting power levels for precision cutting. Metal glowed and parted emergency override triggering as structural integrity failed. The door slid open. Inside, a teenage girl looked up from prison-issue bunk, dark hair, tired eyes, Sarah Voss's features visible despite stress and confinement. She assessed them with quick intelligence that had gotten her imprisoned for hacking military systems. "You're here for extraction. My mother sent you." Not question statement delivered with confidence. Jack moved to her side, running medical scanner to check for injuries or tracking devices. "Can you run?" "Yes." "Can you fight off security teams that are about to arrive?" "We'll find out together." They ran, back through corridors that echoed with alarm klaxons and guard responses. Shan and Mira provided rear security, their Krev's strength making them formidable obstacles. Keth led navigation, his understanding of station systems, identifying alternate routes when primary paths showed security presence. They reached Bay 18 with 2 minutes remaining before lockdown protocols would seal all docking facilities. Voss's transport sat ready, engines cycling through launch preparation. The team piled aboard, guards appearing at quarter intersection behind them. Plasma fire scorched the docking bay as pursuit intensified. Jack returned fire, aiming for equipment rather than people, buying seconds for transport to complete departure sequence. Shan took hit to shoulder-burned armor, burned flesh beneath, but the Krev warrior stayed upright. The transport launched with guards still shooting hull, taking minor damage as they cleared station space. Brevi's defense grid could have destroyed them easily, but Voss's authorization codes identified them as friendly until security updated threat assessments. Those few minutes of confusion were enough. Free space opened around them. Brevi's station fell behind. Sarah Voss sat in the co-pilot seat, her hands already working through transport's electronic systems with casual expertise. "Mom taught me infiltration basics. Didn't think I'd need them to escape detention." Her voice carried bitter humor. "Thanks for the rescue." They returned to the cargo vessel where Voss waited. Mother and daughter reunited with desperate relief, 8 months of separation ending in embrace that spoke volumes. But celebration was premature. They'd freed one prisoner. 217 Krev refugees still needed sanctuary that Colonial Bureau wouldn't hunt them across. Elder Mac gathered the community. "Where do we go? We've escaped, but freedom without destination is just different prison." Ediritha stood, despite recovery still incomplete. Her hand moved to her abdomen, protective gesture that the community noticed immediately. Understanding flowed through assembled Krev. Their queen was carrying new life. First royal birth in 10 years. Her voice carried authority. "We go wherever accepts us as people rather than property. We build community that chooses its own shape. And we protect each other." Voss studied star charts. Outer Rim territories have less Colonial Bureau presence, stations that ask fewer questions. Sarah's hacking skills found additional information: gray market stations, autonomous communities, places existing in maps margins. They selected coordinates for station listed simply as Haven Actual, no official designation, just frontier settlement. 3 weeks travel, time enough to plan, recover, prepare. Jack spent those weeks teaching combat medicine, building knowledge base. Xyrith's pregnancy progressed faster than human gestation, her hybrid biology accelerating development. By week 2, her condition was visible. By week 3, movement required conscious effort. They arrived at Haven Actual to find organized chaos traders, refugees, people who'd chosen margins over mainstream. The station administrator was a woman named Torres, weathered and suspicious. Elder Mac spoke before Xyrith could. We offer knowledge of terraforming engineering skills, warriors who can protect. We ask sanctuary in return. Torres considered. Provisional sanctuary. You cause trouble, you leave. You contribute, you stay. Fair, more than fair. It was acceptance. But arrival at Haven Actual brought unexpected discovery. As Xyrith walked through station corridors, she suddenly stopped. Her hand flew to her chest, amber eyes wide. I feel them. More of my people. Around the corner, 30 additional Krev appeared, refugees who'd escaped Terran invasions, separately hiding on Haven Actual for 8 years. An elderly Krev female stepped forward, tears streaming. My queen, we thought you were the only survivor. Jack's mind reeled. Not just saving one community, reuniting 2 groups who'd thought they were alone. Elder Mac's voice cracked with emotion. We are not the last. We were never the last. The combined Krev community numbered 247. Enough to preserve culture, to build future, to remember what had been lost while creating what could be. Haven Actual became home through simple process of choosing it. Krev carved out station section, building living spaces that honored their culture. Jack established medical clinic, training locals while learning from Krev healers. Voss and Sarah integrated into station security, finding purpose in protection rather than oppression. 4 months after arrival, Xyrith's labor began. Krev births were fast, intense, required minimal intervention. Jack stayed beside her anyway, monitoring vital signs and standing ready. 6 hours of labor. Then their daughter emerged, hybrid biology, visible immediately, purple-tinged skin with human features, small but vital. Jack held his daughter for the first time, feeling weight that had nothing to do with physical mass. Responsibility, love, terror, hope. Xyrith's exhausted voice carried joy. What do we call her? Jack thought of the Sarah he'd lost, murdered for discovering truth. But this wasn't borrowed memorial. This was new person deserving her own identity. Hope. We call her Hope because that's what she represents. The Krev community celebrated. First royal birth in decade. Elder Mac held Hope with reverence, paying respect to Queen's daughter and symbol of survival. 6 months passed in relative peace. Krev community thrived, contributing to station economy through engineering and cultural exchange. Jack's clinic served both species. Voss trained security forces. Then priority transmission arrived. Colonial Bureau requesting negotiation. Director Chen led team of 6 diplomats in security. She sat across from Jack, Xyrith, Voss, and Elder Mac, professionally neutral. Colonial Bureau recognizes pursuit has become counterproductive. We're prepared to offer terms. Jack's voice stayed flat. What terms? Full amnesty for all persons involved in Asset BS-247's escape. Dismissal of charges against Commander Voss and Sarah. Recognition of Krev refugee community's right to self-governance. Chen paused. In exchange, signed a documentation acknowledging Project Monarch's termination and agreement that no information about the program will be disclosed publicly. Xyrith's hand clenched. You want us silent, buying freedom with gag order. We want a closed chapter that has become politically untenable. Project Monarch was expensive failure. Take the deal or spend the rest of your lives looking over shoulders. Jack studied Chen's face, reading micro-expressions. Why now? What changed? Chen hesitated, then spoke carefully. Someone leaked Project Monarch documentation to multiple news organizations. Systematic evidence of illegal operations. Colonial Bureau is facing investigation. We need this resolved cleanly. Understanding hit Jack. Sarah Voss, teenage hacker. She'd found documentation during infiltration, quietly distributed it. Information weapon that wounded the system. He looked at Sarah, seeing small smile that confirmed his guess. Elder Mac's voice carried communal decision. We accept. With amendment, Colonial Bureau provides reparations fund for Krev community. Compensation for 10 years of captivity. Chen nodded. That can be arranged. The agreement was drafted over 6 hours. Legal documentation transforming them from fugitives to recognize community. Not perfect justice perpetrators would never face real consequences, but it was survival and future. Life on Haven Actual settled into rhythms approaching normal. Jack's clinic expanded. Zirith led community with quiet authority. Hope grew faster than human children at 6 months, walking at 9 months, speaking at 1 year, asking questions, suggesting intelligence beyond apparent age. Jack watched his daughter explore with fearless curiosity. Hybrid child born from refugee queen and frontier medic. Living proof that connection transcended species boundaries. But 3 months after the agreement, encrypted transmission arrived for Jack. No sender identification, just location coordinates in single words, Sarah. Jack's heart clenched. His dead wife's name. Someone knew things they shouldn't. He traveled alone to Coordinate's abandoned depot in Haven Actual's industrial section. Inside, holographic display activated, showing woman he didn't recognize. Jack Morrison. My name is Director Yuki Chen, not the Chen you met, her superior. Jack's hand moved toward weapon. What do you want? To tell you truth about your wife, Sarah Morrison didn't just find Project Monarch documentation. She found proof of something bigger. Colonial Bureau has been conducting illegal bioengineering across 17 programs. Monarch was smallest piece. The hologram shifted, displaying files and images. Classified documentation showing programs that made Project Monarch look humane by comparison. Sarah was going to expose everything. So they killed her and made you believe it was accident, knowing your guilt would keep you isolated and contained. Chen's voice carried weight. But Sarah had contingency. She encrypted the evidence and hid access codes in places only someone who knew her intimately would find. Jack's mind raced. Why tell me this now? Because the agreement you signed only covers Project Monarch. Colonial Bureau thinks they've contained the damage, but Sarah's evidence still exists, and I believe you deserve to decide what happens with it. The hologram provided location coordinates. The data is here, encrypted with answers to questions only you would know. What you do with it is your choice. Expose everything and face consequences, or let your wife's death remain meaningless. The hologram deactivated, leaving Jack in darkness. He returned to Haven Actual, mind churning. Sarah had left him a weapon, evidence that could bring down entire programs. But using it meant risking everything they'd built. Safety for his daughter. Peace for the Krev. Stability for refugees who'd finally found home. He told Zirith everything. She listened, one hand on Hope sleeping in her arms. What will you do? Her voice carried no judgment. Jack was silent long time. Then he spoke with certainty. Sarah died fighting for truth, but she also believed in protecting people who needed protection. If I expose everything, Colonial Bureau collapses, and the power vacuum could be worse than current system. Frontier stations need some oversight, even flawed oversight. He met Zurith's amber gaze. But I'm keeping the evidence, insurance. If Colonial Bureau ever threatens our people again, I'll release everything. Mutually assured destruction. Zirith nodded slowly. The warrior's choice. Sheathed weapon is sometimes more powerful than drawn blade. Jack retrieved Sarah's encrypted data, spending 3 days breaking encryption with answers only he knew. Dates, places, private moments. The files were comprehensive, damning capable of destroying Colonial Bureau's bioengineering programs permanently. He copied everything to secure storage, then contacted Director Yuki Chen through the same encrypted channel. I have the data. I'm keeping it. Tell Colonial Bureau if they honor the agreement, the evidence stays buried. If they violate terms or threaten my people, everything goes public. Chen's response came 12 hours later. Understood. Your restraint is noted and appreciated. The agreement will be honored. Months passed into years. Hope grew into a child who spoke both human English and Krev linguistic structures, who asked questions suggesting intelligence beyond her age, who explored Haven Actual with fearless curiosity. The Krev community thrived, building culture that honored past while adapting to present. Jack's clinic expanded, serving growing population. Voss and Sarah built security force that protected without oppressing. 3 years after their arrival, Haven Actual held its first memorial ceremony. Jack stood before assembled crowd, Krev and humans together, dedicating monument to those who died fighting for freedom. 2 names were carved at top: Sarah Morrison and Elena Voss. Jack placed his hand on cold metal. Commander Voss survived Carrick Station's destruction. She helped us escape. She fought beside us. His voice cracked slightly. 6 months ago, Colonial Bureau assassins found her. She died protecting Sarah, her daughter, alive because of sacrifice her mother made twice. He paused, gathering strength. They told us we were disposable. They were wrong. Every person who fights for dignity, who refuses to be reduced to property, who chooses connection over isolation, they matter. They always mattered. Hope, now 3 years old, placed small hand over his. Grandma Sarah would be proud of you, Daddy. Jack looked at his impossible daughter, at Zyrith, standing strong beside their family at community they'd built from refusal and hope. Yeah, both grandmas would be. That evening, Jack stood in quarters he shared with Zyrith, holding the old photograph of his dead wife. Sarah's smile looked out at him across 8 years and infinite grief. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I think you'd like what we built, what your death eventually led toward. His voice carried words he'd needed to speak for years. I'm going to keep building it, in your memory, in honor of everyone who fought. Zyrith's hand settled on his shoulder. She would be proud. Jack turned from photograph, moving toward Hope's sleeping area. Their daughter dreamed peacefully, unaware of complex history that shaped her existence. That was gift, not needing to carry trauma that formed her parents' lives. He would tell her eventually. About grandmother Sarah, who died fighting for truth. About mother's survival against systematic oppression. About community formed from refugees who refused assigned roles. But tonight he simply watched her sleep and felt something he hadn't allowed himself in 8 years. Not just survival or duty or responsibility. Actual contentment. Quiet satisfaction of building something worth protecting. Outside their quarters, Haven Actual continued its existence in space's margins. Inside, family slept, safely chosen family built from survival and refusal and stubborn insistence that people deserve dignity. Jack Morrison, 69 years old, former combat medic and fugitive father of impossible hybrid child, allowed himself to believe they'd won. Not perfectly, not permanently, but for now, in this moment, they'd carved out space where the discarded could remember their worth. Hope stirred in sleep, small hand reaching unconsciously. Jack took it gently, feeling her fingers wrap around his thumb with complete trust. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Systems that created Project Monarch still existed, still operated, still treated people as resources. But tonight they were safe. Tonight they had community. Tonight they had future they'd chosen rather than future imposed upon them. And sometimes that had to be enough. 5 years after founding Haven Actual's Krev community, Jack stood in an expanded medical facility training the next generation. Young humans and Krev learning combat medicine together, building knowledge that transcended species boundaries. Hope, now 8 years old and frighteningly intelligent, sat in a corner reading advanced medical texts, absorbing information at rate that suggested enhanced cognitive processing from her hybrid genetics. She looked up as Jack noticed her attention. Daddy, why did they hurt Mama's people? The question hit with weight it always did. How do you explain systematic cruelty to a child who'd never known anything but acceptance? Jack knelt beside her, meeting eyes that held both his determination and Zyrith's amber clarity. Because they were afraid. People who are afraid often hurt people who are different at trying to control what they don't understand. But we're different. Everyone here is different. And that's why we're strong, because we chose to see difference as strength instead of threat. Hope considered this with seriousness beyond her years. When I'm bigger, I'm going to be doctor like you, so I can help people who are hurt by afraid people. Jack's chest tightened with pride and grief. His daughter was 8 years old and already understood more about human nature than most adults would learn in a lifetime. Then I'll teach you everything I know. That night, Krev community gathered for ceremony marking 8th anniversary of their arrival. Elder Mac, now truly ancient, stood before assembled crowd. 8 years ago, we were refugees hiding in salvage yards, believing we were last remnants of destroyed civilization. Today, we are community. We are family. We are future. His weathered hand gestured toward Hope. And we have proof that different species can create life together, building bridges where others saw only divisions. The community celebrated late into station's artificial night. Jack watched from observation deck, Zyrith beside him, their daughter dancing with Krev, children who'd been born into freedom rather than captivity. Do you ever regret it? Zyrith's question came quiet. Everything you gave up to help us, Jack considered. He'd lost his career, his citizenship, any chance of returning to mainstream human society. He'd spent 3 years as fugitive, living in constant fear of capture. He carried guilt over Sarah's murder that would never fully heal. But he'd also gained family, purpose, community, proof that one person's choice to see another's humanity could cascade into transformation. No, I don't regret any of it. Zareth's hand found his violet fingers interweaving with human. I chose well then, when I decided you were worth trusting. We both chose well. They stood together, watching their daughter embody impossible future, while Haven Actual's lights spread across darkness like promise made tangible. Jack Morrison had spent 69 years learning that the universe was harsh, indifferent, often cruel. But in those same 69 years, he'd also learned that people could choose differently, could build something better from ruins of what others destroyed, could prove that discarded lives held worth beyond any system's measurement. His daughter laughed below sound, carrying pure joy, uncomplicated by history's weight. That laugh was victory, not over Colonial Bureau or Project Monarch or any specific enemy. Victory over the assumption that some lives mattered less than others, over systems that reduced people to property, over fear that prevented connection across difference. 8 years ago, Jack had been broken man running from guilt and grief. Today, he was father, partner, teacher, builder of community that shouldn't exist according to every rule governing their universe. The rules were wrong. They'd proven it. And they'd keep proving it, one choice at a time, one connection at a time, one impossible child at a time. Hope looked up, caught her father watching, and waved with unself-conscious joy. Jack waved back, feeling weight and wonder of everything that small gesture represented. His name was Jack Morrison. He was 69 years old, and his life had just begun.